When companies have okay, we've got a new purpose or a new mission or new values or strategy, or not even new, we've just had it, but no one really gets it, is going in and helping their leaders, and not just the senior exec team, sort of the next few levels down, how they communicate the purpose through a story and through a personal story. Like, how do they communicate values? How do you communicate a value such as integrity?
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to human resources innovators about innovation in the world of HR. If you're a people leader or you're looking for a new way to think about how to help others be successful, this is the podcast for you. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, really excited for this week's conversation. We are here with Gabrielle Dolan. She has an extremely awesome bio, so I won't be able to read the whole thing, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So she can tell a story or two. It was while working in senior leadership roles in corporate Australia, she realized the power of storytelling and effective business communication. Now she is a highly sought-after international keynote speaker and educator. To do a little bit of name dropping, she's got some clients that include Visa, Amazon, Vodafone, the Obama Foundation, and so on and so forth. She has so many publications, I wouldn't even start to read them for you. And she is also the founder of Jargon Free Fridays. So we are going to pivot into the conversation now.
Thanks, Kyle. You got pivot in quite early. It's one of my pet hates at the moment. Thank you for being here. I feel like I'm coming home because I spent a good chunk of my career in corporate Australia in HR roles.
Absolutely. Well, welcome back to the dark side of human resources. So
I thought I got out.
Yeah, you never get out. You're always in the club, whether you want to be or not.
It's a bit like Hotel California, is it? You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. Some of us are probably feeling checked out after a couple of years of of all the things we've dealt with in HR, but hopefully not today. So really looking forward to the conversation. And I am laughing. In the bio, it literally says, don't ever say the word pivot to her unless you're talking about basketball. So I had to drop it in there. I'm a disruptor. That's just what I do.
Yes, I could tell you did that deliberately.
Yeah. Well, before we hit record, we were talking about, you almost have to have a little bit of a twisted sense of humor to last in human resources. And you got a good 10 years. So good for you. So I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
So, I'm really excited about this conversation. And, one of the things that I love is stories and, you look at all sorts of research related to great salespeople and great brands and great companies. And, there is that common theme where you can find that a lot of times there's a great story there. There's a reason that people are listening, or why, the brand resonates and things like that. And so I maybe want to start off with what got you interested in the power of stories.
Yeah, it was when I worked. So if we go back a little bit further, I did start my career in technology. So I was like a trainee computer operator back in the 80s when, computers first came about. And after about 5 or 6 years in that, what I started to get really interested in was looking after the training for the technology people. And I guess that was my pivot. Let's see how many times we can actually say the word pivot. That was my pivot into HR, because what I found, I was less interested in, being on the tools as such in technology, but I was really interested in helping people develop, professionally develop. And I'd search all their training and I'd look for them and I'd roster them on training. We'd do all this stuff. And that started my career in HR, and that progressed into some pretty senior change management roles. So, I was at the bank. This was one of Australia's largest banks for 17 years. So you progress in leadership. So I had people leadership roles, but it was in my last couple of years, it was some pretty major change management roles. So rolling out a lot of technology change across the organisation, but me being it from a people's perspective. So how do we get the people to change? Because it is, I think most change fails because the people aren't adopting the new processes and behaviours, nothing wrong with the technology. And it was there that I started to notice that when I started to share a story to just communicate a message I was getting across. So it could be a message about why we were doing this change. It could be a message about the impact the change was going to have on the business units. So I noticed when I started to share a story to speaking to the business units, they seem to understand the message better. We may not have got 100% compliance, which we're not going to do, but they seem to understand why we were doing it. And they seem to not only understand the message better, but remember it. And then that's when so it was probably almost 20 years ago now that this was happening. And I started to experiment with using stories myself in the way I communicated and influenced. And then I started to do a whole heap of research, and there'd been a couple of books written on it, but not a lot. But I knew it was a really powerful, not only communication skill, but influencing skill. And so, yeah, that's how I got into it. And for the last 17 years, I've been working with leaders of all time, of all companies and industries, on how they actually communicate and influence more effectively through stories.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that I've spent a lot of time in front of people trying to get them to listen. And when you're talking about something that maybe is as exciting as HR compliance or performance evaluations, or something that's maybe a little bit more emotional, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I could absolutely name the times where I've made the mistake of jumping right into the content without setting really setting the stage or setting the context or helping people understand why are we here. Really, really powerful. So I didn't mention this, but you do have a latest book out, Magnetic Stories, Connect with Customers and Engage Employees with Brand Storytelling, recently published here this year. So what got you interested in focusing on kind of customers and employee engagement as it relates to storytelling?
Yeah, look, probably the focus of all my previous books have been internal. So it really has been the focus of my previous books is around how we do engage employees. So, how as a leader or company do you communicate messages? And, I look at, you said diversity and equity inclusion. You can't communicate that without stories. I truly believe you can't communicate that without stories. Even something like compliance, it was we go straight into what they need to do as opposed to sharing a story about why they need to do it, which is, if you're not explaining the why, then you're not going to get compliance. So the vast majority of the work I still do, and my previous books have been about how we communicate values internally, because maybe we can speak more about that later, because I think as a HR professional, as a HR industry, that is probably one of the biggest benefits they can bring to the company, is to roll out those values in a much better way, because we've all been involved in a lot of values rollouts. Anyway, we can talk about that a bit later, Kyle. But so is it the focus of the previous books have been internal, and it was only in the last couple of years that I noticed this concept of storytelling and brand storytelling really taking off, and people were talking about storytelling, brand loyalty through stories. And what I noticed two things. Companies were implementing brand storytelling, or thought they were implementing it, and I'd be sitting there going, that's not the way to do it. You don't do it like that. So I could see people trying to do it and weren't doing it effectively. And on the other side, I heard all these amazing stories from companies and would say, tell me you're sharing that. Tell me that's on your website. Tell me that's on your induction program. And they would go, no. They go, oh, would anyone be interested in that? Or, no, I haven't really thought about it. So there was some companies that understood the power of story but didn't know how to implement it, and there was a whole heap of other companies that didn't understand the power of story and weren't even contemplating how they share stories, both internally and externally, to connect and engage both with customers and employees. And I think because of social media, it's really hard to distinguish those two audiences now. That I think, customers and employees, a lot of the time you are communicating on the same platform in the same way to them.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having
everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And you know, this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, what you just said there just resonated with me. I definitely think that, you know, I'd put myself in that latter camp where there's so many great stories there, but you know, my organization specifically, I don't know that we certainly haven't been intentional in connecting those stories to the broader vision of who we are and who we can be, and you know, how do we make the world a not just, you know, making profits for our organization, but also making the world a better place to be and making our employees, you know,
Yeah.
have a great place to work, that sort of thing. You know, it just reminded me, I just had a meeting with our DEI committee and we were talking about these things, and there were like 10 awesome stories of things that we're doing all over the world that nobody knew anything about. And everybody's like, that's great. That's really great. And somebody did ask the question, so are we telling anybody about this stuff?
I know.
And I think, yeah, I just wrote a to-do list. Okay, I need to share some of this stuff. So
yeah, and Cole, you're not, you know, that's I could be in work for the rest of my life. That's exactly what I do. When companies have go, okay, we've got a new purpose or a new mission or new values or strategy, or not even new, we've just had it, but no one really gets it.
yeah.
Is going in and helping their leaders, and not just the senior exec team, sort of the, you know, the next few levels down, how they communicate the purpose through a story and through a personal story. Like, how do they communicate values? How do you communicate a value such as integrity without a story, a personal story? You can't communicate values with bullet points. And that's what we've been doing in the past. Companies come up with their values and then write a few, this is what it means to us, which is fine. But if your leaders don't understand it, it's Cole. I don't get surprised about this anymore. But when I run training workshops for leaders, and I go, okay, so we're going to share personal stories around your company values, and we go through the values, and I pick one, and I say it is integrity, and I'll call on someone. I'll go, hey John, so just tell me what integrity means to you. Just personally, what it means to you. Don't worry about what's written on the, you know, the strategy on a page. What does it mean to you? And they'll go, it means respect. I go, yeah, okay. What does that mean? Keep talking to me. What does integrity mean? And after about 20 seconds, they'll do this. They'll go, oh, gee, you've put me on the spot here. I haven't really thought about this that much before. And these are senior leaders we're asking to, you know, transform the company, lead the values, and they haven't spent more than 20 seconds thinking about what it means to them. So then I take them through the process of helping them be really clear what it means to them, and then finding a personal story to share it, which they make the connection themselves to the values, but then they're better able to share the story so their team can make the connection as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm chuckling because it's similar to me where, you know, we've got values, but if I were to go to my senior leaders and I said, hey, what are they?
Yeah.
It would be hit or miss, I think, you know,
yeah.
But to your point, it's like, yeah, how often do we actually think about it?
Yeah.
You know, and is it really top of mind, or is it just something that's on a website and it's a, like marketing came up with it, and so I guess I have to agree with it, kind of an approach. So,
or we come up, we create it into an acronym, because that way everyone's going to remember them. It's like no one remembers them.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want me to give you an example? What I mean?
Sure.
It's like,
yes, please give me a story.
Yeah, we can't do this whole thing without sharing a story.
Right,
I reckon
please.
I've got heaps of stories I think I could share with you that your audience would appreciate. But let me give you an example of what I mean by this. I'm talking about, say you had the value integrity, right? So and whether your company values integrity or respect or doing the right thing, you know, there'll be all these different words for it. But this is an example came from, I was doing work with a large company, going through what does integrity mean, picking a value or the other values. And this woman, her name was Anne, and so I took her through the process. What does integrity mean to you? And she went, it means telling the truth. Okay, what else does it mean? It means, and she's, if you say you're going to do something, do it. Go, great. And I just keep saying what else to say it a few times. And then she sort of said, what it really means to me is doing the right thing all the time. She said, I think we're pretty good at doing the right thing when it suits us, not so great when it doesn't suit us. Okay. So now we're really clear on the message. Like, that's the message. So then I take them through the process of how do they find a personal story to communicate that. So I'm just going to share the story Anne came up with, and maybe I'll pretend I'm Anne and I'm your new CEO or whatever, and I'll ask you what your reaction is of the story afterwards. So Anne was said in the early 60s, my dad was a professional swimmer, and he reached the point in his career where he actually tried out for the national swim squad. And on the day of the meet, he was apparently winning his race, and he got to the end to do the tumble turn, and he slightly misjudged the wall. Now, this was in the early 60s, so there was no technology, no sensors in the wall, and there was judges, but with all that splashing and kicking, he was pretty sure that no one knew whether he touched the wall or not. But he had to make a split-second decision. Does he go back and touch the wall, or does he just keep swimming? And he decided to go back and touch the wall. Now, you don't really recover from a swim race when you got to do that, and he didn't. He never, ever made the national swim squad. And I would sometimes ask Dad, there must be times when you regret going back to touch the wall. And he would always respond with, I've never regretted that, because if I didn't go back and touch the wall, I'd have to spend the rest of my life knowing I did the wrong thing. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of our value, integrity. There's going to be moments, it's only a matter of time before we come across our own go back and touch the wall moment. And I invite you to consider what my dad would do. What does that story do for you?
Yeah, it's funny because it's one thing to hear you talk about like integrity and, and like the example of an individual who is thinking about it and is prompted to think a little bit more deeply about it, versus hearing a story of a human who, maybe put himself in adversity's way to do the right thing. And I actually had a little bit of an emotional reaction to it. It was almost like the hairs on the back of your neck. You're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that really spoke to me. So yeah, it was definitely much more of a, an engaged emotional response to what I can only imagine was an extremely difficult moment for that individual. But, yeah. I mean, great.
So,
great
and that's the power of stories. You have an emotional, and we talk, it doesn't have to be all emotional, but somehow it just got you a little bit, and that's the emotional reaction. And as humans, that's what we connect. And when I share that story in training workshops, I sort of say, what does that do for you? And everyone, all the participants will go, I really trust her. She's got integrity. She has a high standards. This is the way she's going to behave. This is the expectation she has of us. And it was just going, wow, that's a powerful, 90 seconds, isn't it, to get all that message across? And I still keep in contact with Anne, and Anne says that this story is part of her personal induction program or onboarding program, where she literally says every single person that works for her hears that story. And because she knows, in her own words, she goes, I know the heavy lifting that story does for me. And I think she's now worked at 3 different companies since we did this. And even though the name of the values, like one of the values was honesty at one company she worked with, it's the same story. It's just linking it to that value. And, even if she didn't work for a company, it's her own personal value, but that the story does. But yeah, sadly, what we tend to do in organizations is go, we have a value of integrity. And what this means is doing the right thing, telling the truth, being respectful. It's like, so what? So what?
Yeah, everybody thinks they have integrity.
Exactly.
It's like asking an interview question. Do you have integrity? The answer is always going to be yes, of course, I have integrity. I mean, yeah, it's yeah, and then it's just kind of nothingness, right? It's like it's hollow, right?
Can I tell you a funny? You've just reminded me, of a funny little interview anecdote. You might have heard this one, where the interviewer asked the interviewee, "What's your greatest weakness?" And he says, telling the truth. I can't help but always tell the truth. And the interviewer goes, I don't think that's a weakness. And he goes, I don't give a fuck what you think.
Perfect. That guy's hired. Or
yeah, he's hired.
I don't get. Yeah, I love that'd be my favorite interview response. I do. You hate jargon. I hate those canned interview questions like, "What's your greatest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" It's just like, yeah. I don't care.
Oh, no.
And now, a word from our sponsors. When Molly, Patrick, and I tried to figure out how to start our own podcast, we didn't know where to start. Thankfully, we found Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout makes it super easy for us to upload our episodes, track our listeners, and get listed on all the major podcast networks. Today's a great day to start your own podcast. I know that you're one of our listeners, so you've definitely got something to say. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all the major podcast directories within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't that hard when you have the right partner, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. And now, for listeners of Rebel HR, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card sent to you from Buzzsprout by clicking in the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Are you looking to grow your personal brand or your business brand? Take it from me that podcasts are a great way to do it. Here's the secret. We all want to feel connected to the brands that we buy from. What better way to humanize a brand than through sharing your personal story on a podcast? I have had great success with Kitcaster. Kitcaster is a podcast booking agency that specializes in developing real human connections through podcast appearances. And let me tell you, it's all about the right human connection. You can expect a completely customized concierge service from their staff of communication experts. Kitcaster is your secret weapon in podcasting for business. Your audience is waiting to hear from you. For a limited time offer, listeners to the Rebel HR podcast can go to www.kitcaster.com/rebel to get a special offer for friends of the podcast. Rebel on.
A friend of mine went for a job interview, and they said, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" And she said, "Doing your job." And I reckon that's a really great response because she got the job.
Oh my! So I got that. That's funny. You just here's a story for you. So I was interviewing for this job. I don't know how many years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. And I was out. We were out at lunch, and it had been a totally it had been a jargon free interview experience. And I'm like, I really like this company. These are just real people. It's a conversational interview. Through the course of the conversations, I'm like, there's a lot of opportunity at this company. I think I can make a difference. And then I'm out at lunch, and one of the guys goes, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" And I gave the most flowery HR answer, full of jargon. It was just it was a total BS response, and he kind of caught me off guard because I was kind of out of the whole interview mindset at that point, and I was trying to eat an enchilada without getting it on my suit, And at the end of my response, I look at him and I go, "That was a terrible response. I'm sorry. That was such an HR response." The honest answer is, I don't really know, but I'm really enjoying this interview, and so I'd love to work here if you'll have me. Everybody laughed, and they're like, "Yeah, that was a total BS response," but I got the job, so hey, there you go.
You recovered well.
It was bad. I guess I hate it so much that I refuse to answer it in an appropriate way. But anyways.
Maybe that's a secret. Maybe HR are asking that question to see if people call it out for how crap a question is.
Maybe. I don't know. I think it's lazy. If you want my honest opinion, asking those types of questions, you're just reading the interview instead of actually connecting with someone. So that's one that, we're kind of going an interesting tangent here, but I want to continue to explore it because my opinion is when we get into things like talent assessment, talent selection, talent acquisition, all these really fun, HR buzzwords and things that are kind of pretty huge headaches for HR right now. I just think so much of that is related to storytelling. It's the story that you tell yourself about that employee. It's the story that an interview candidate tells you about themselves. And it's ultimately, it's kind of the perception that you walk away from those types of interactions with. And so, what have you seen as it relates to like organizations that understand the value of stories, and how do they incorporate that into their their talent systems, kind of their internal talent processes?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the whole concept of an interview, and especially the behavioural event interview processes, I assume they still do that these days. Is people are telling stories, so it's literally you're saying, "Tell me a time when you have," and so they're telling stories, and the whole concept is we want them telling stories because that actually creates a better picture for us. Like, and we form it's sort of like a more rounded view we have of them. I think things have flipped. Like every time you're interviewing someone for a job, they're interviewing you as well. They're deciding
Yeah.
whether they're going to work for, this younger generation have just got, yeah, whatever. I'll decide whether I work for you. Thank you very much. And so the point is, if we've spent decades trying to draw stories out of the applicant to find a better picture of them, we should be proactively sharing stories about the company so they want to work for you. So if you've got a really great culture, for example, don't just say we've got a great culture. I was like, well, every job, no one's recruiting someone and going, oh, by the way, we've got a pretty shit culture. Just thought I'd let you know. It's just like so. Instead of saying we got a great culture, we really value diversity, for example, share stories about that. Like, give me an example. Give me an example of your great culture. Give me an example of your diversity inclusion. And so it's finding those stories and sharing them. So just like you said, previously you spoke to the DE&I team and there was 10 great stories about diversity inclusion. But if no one knows about them, so these stories should not only form part of any onboarding process. So, when people actually take on the job, they're learning it, but they should actually form part of a recruitment process. So it was interesting. I just actually had a meeting with a client last week, and they're bringing me in specifically to do that. So they've just created this whole new employee value proposition. I'm really reluctant to say acronyms because I hate jargon and I hate acronyms. So an EVP, they've developed
good old EVPs. Yeah, oh yeah.
But it's just as easy to say employee value proposition. And I'm going to go in and train their leaders and their recruiters, the people recruiting, on how to share stories because the whole reason you've got an EVP is to attract people to your company. And the most effective way to share that is through stories, not just stating, the benefits. That's what we normally do. We go, oh, these are the benefits. I was like, all right, okay. So that really doesn't distinguish you from anyone else. But it's the stories. And Cole, when you said, when I shared that story about the swimmer going back and touch the wall, you said I had a bit of like an emotional connection. That's what people are doing. They're walking away. Every good story you share, there's an emotional connection. And they walk out of the interview going, I really want to work for this company. And if the interviewer is really good at storytelling, that's when you walk out and go, we really want to employ this person because you've created an emotional connection.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I'm just reflecting back on my experience, and I haven't thought about it really in this context, but I always have thought about those people, those candidates, those employees that I've connected with as just, maybe a little bit of implicit bias. Maybe they're like me, but yeah, every once in a while you'll interact with somebody and you just click, like there's that connection, right? But I'm thinking about that in the context of storytelling, and I'm thinking about one of the last interview candidates that I spoke with. It was all stories. We were sharing stories about our it's totally, HR inappropriate. We were talking about our families. We were talking about things we like to do. It was a much more personal discussion. It was just about, it was about ourselves. But this candidate specifically was a really good storyteller.
Yeah.
To the point that I'm like, oh, gee, he'd be wonderful on this team.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we couldn't hire him because somebody else hired him.
Yeah. But you just said it was more personal. Like as an interview should be. It's the biggest mistake with interviews is people just go in and discuss the resume. All the information's in there. They can do the job. That's why they've got to the interview process. The whole process of an interview should be, will this person fit into our culture? Will we like working with them? And it's through those stories you can sort of decide that, and you create the emotional connection. And we keep talking about emotion. That's the power of a story. Is we're humans. As humans, we are emotional beings, and anyone in traditional sales roles will tell you people buy on emotion and justify on logic. And whether you're buying, a pair of shoes or the latest iPhone, or you're buying into, I want to work with this company, or you're buying into a strategy, like you're buying into compliance, you're buying into diversity and inclusion, you were doing that on an emotional level. And of course, everything should make sense. All the logic should be there. But I believe most change fails because we try to communicate change through logic, and only logic, where we need to communicate it through stories to get that emotional connection, and people will rationalize it on the logic. So you need the logic, but it's just logic doesn't do much to influence people. It just informs them, doesn't influence them.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that. I'm a big data guy. This is sound nerdy, but I love statistics, like in standard deviations, and I find it fascinating, and I find that, it can really, really help inform, a business. But, I've learned over the years that you have to couple that with something that gets people to actually, understand what's behind it. Right. And so an example of maybe a story for you. So one of the statistics that was really, really shocking to me in my local community was the fact that we had a significant percentage of unemployed individuals who were immigrants. And, it was right there. It was a number, and it was like telling people, hey, we have like double-digit unemployment levels in this specific community of people, and people be like, oh, that's too bad. Okay, right. But then when I started to explain that in the context that my organization at that time went out, we specifically did outreach to that community to understand why. And here's what we found: some, language, some skills gaps. A lot of them didn't even know we existed. So it was just like making that connection, and then telling people, and oh, by the way, we brought in this individual, and he was a trainer, and he brought his friends, and they never missed work, and they showed up with a great attitude. And then people start listening. They're like, oh, okay. Like, oh, there's an opportunity there. But then telling the story of that individual who he's now moved on to be a leader of an entire cell. And that is one of the most stable departments within that organization right now, and put him on a path to go get a college degree. And then people start to really connect with that individual. And then when I actually put a picture of him in the presentation as I was explaining it to people, then it was like people were with me, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
and
really powerful.
You've just highlighted how the power of influence. You can't do it just with data. Like the data it's there, it's informative, but it was only through the story and the specific story, and even the personalized story showing the picture of him, his name. That's what people connect with. So it's sort of, yes, you need the data, but it's the story that will influence people and really connect with them, and they'll use the data to support that. I think I'm going to throw a rock here. I might be really controversial here, Kyle, but I think one of the problems with HR professionals is that they've often maybe even accused or being told, HR fluffy, all that bloody fluffy stuff, just give me the facts. It's not, you don't understand the business. So I think they try to go, okay, so I'm not going to share stories. I'm not going to go get into the emotional stuff. I'm going to go hard on the data because that's what, the business units are saying they need. The business units are still humans. So I think sometimes people in HR have flicked too much to trying to influence through data because they don't want to be accused of being fluffy, and therefore at their own peril, I think sometimes missing the amazing opportunities of sharing stories to communicate the message as well.
That's really interesting insight. And to be honest, until the last few years of my career, I was absolutely that way because I was so caught up in the stigma that we have to be data driven and everything has to, tie back to some financial metric. And I have to have an ROI or a cost benefit analysis on everything that we do. And I spent a lot of time kind of spinning my wheels there. It wasn't until the last few years where I'm in a more strategic role where I found that the power of humanity is just as important, if not more important, especially to the leaders of my organization, where, they really are, my CEO leans on me to be the eyes and ears and conscience of the organization and make sure that he understands, the ripple effect of decisions. And if I can't tell those stories to him, then he's going to go find someone else who can, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of my job. And so I think, to an HR professional that's maybe struggling with that, I certainly didn't get into this profession to pour over Excel spreadsheets and interpret data all day long. At a certain point, I want to start to impact people in a positive way. So I don't disagree with you at all in that observation. I don't know. I still struggle with getting a little bit too fluffy though.
Yeah, no. So,
Right.
so it's not, and this is again the interpretation. Like the fluffy people think it's fluffy, but it's if it's getting your message across more effectively, and it's I love storytelling. I'm going to tell you a secret. I also really love Excel spreadsheets. So I'm not against data. I'm not against data. I'm not against tracking. But when you're trying to communicate it and influence change, it's how you do that story. The story I'm thinking I might share with you as another example is it'll be, you'll be able to relate from a HR perspective, because I think in a lot of support roles in companies like HR, risk, marketing, comms, you've got to do a big influencing role. It's normally when you're trying to get the business units on board and the different departments and the exec team and stuff. It's a major influencing role. So this was I worked with an entire risk team, and the head of risk, her name was Rosemary, and she said that the biggest issue I have is every time risk is raised, all the business units go, well, you're the risk manager, that's your job. I mean, you might get the same. Well, that's a people issue. That's your job, right? And she says, it doesn't matter how many times I've told them I cannot manage their risk for them. All I can do is help them manage their risk. She says the behavior doesn't change. She goes, I've given case study after case study, example after example of the benefits of managing risk, the consequences of not. But she goes, I cannot influence their behavior around it. So this is the story she shared, right? She said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm, and growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do if we ever came across redback spiders in the timber heap, and we knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this really hot day, mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the front gate. So I ran down the path and I just froze, because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything mum taught us to do. So I played statues, and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. Now, I'll put it to you. Do you reckon that helps you understand the role of a risk manager better and the role you play in risk?
We don't have copperhead snakes. Sounds super scary. So
yeah, exactly.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and do you think you'd remember the story?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
you will
remember that
remember
one.
it. Yeah, you
I remember
definitely
that one.
remember
I'm
it.
going to remember the swimmer
Yeah,
story. Yeah,
and
exactly.
you'll remember it because it's tapped into emotion. And
Right.
I'll ask you another question: if you had to, could you retell that story without losing its meaning? Wouldn't have to be word for word, but do you reckon you could retell it without losing its meaning?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you think about it, I would suggest that in your role, in your listener's role, some of the fundamental challenges they have, do people understand what they're saying? Like actually understand it in the first place? Can they remember it? So when the meeting's over, when the presentation's finished, can they actually remember it? And can they, if they had to, go back and tell their people without losing the meaning? And a really short, sharp personal story like that, like the copperhead snake, can do that. And so this is where it can become one of your most strategic, effective influencing skills. But you know, it is a skill. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it and doing it well, and I wouldn't have a job. It's not easy because there's a very, very big difference between sharing stories with your friends and sharing strategic stories really succinctly to get your message across effectively. That's a massive skill.
Absolutely. Yeah, really, really powerful stuff, and some really great examples that I think you've given me some things to think about. I'm sure our listeners are sitting here thinking, "Oh, geez, I got this big thing coming up. What story can I tell about it right now?"
Yeah.
So, if you want to learn more, Magnetic Stories is out now. I'm sure there's a ton of great content in there. I wish we could keep going, but we are coming to the end of our time together. So, I want to shift gears. I won't say pivot.
Oh, we only said pivot once. We didn't get enough pivots
Okay,
in
we
there.
can do it
Let's
again.
pivot.
We're going to
Let's
pivot
pivot.
into the Rebel HR Flash round. So, you ready?
I'm ready. Hey,
All right.
before we do that, Carl, I should say, I know this probably all be in your show notes and everything, but if people are interested in how they sort of get started with this storytelling, on my website there's a 7-day storytelling starter kit. It's free and it just goes for 7 days. They'll get a little email from me for 7 days, and it will help them start thinking about, well, how do I find these stories and where could I use them and why would I use them? So it's sort of, as the name suggests, it's a good way to get started on storytelling.
Perfect. Yeah, we will have all that in the show notes as well. So,
all right, quick fire round.
All right, perfect.
I'm a little bit nervous. Should I be nervous?
No.
Okay.
I mean, you can be nervous if you want, but All right, question number 1. What is your favorite people book?
As in about people?
Something that gave you insight into people. Could be a people story. It doesn't have to be a book. It can.
It was actually I think Dan and Chip Heath's first book called Made to Stick. I love that book. It's one of, there's a few business books you read over and over again, and it's Made to Stick. And of course, they talk about stories, but yeah, that was a real insight to me about how people think.
All right, perfect. All right, question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
Yourself. Listen to your voice, and the voice that encourages you to do stuff, not the really loud, annoying voice that says you can't do that. Be true to yourself. Listen to yourself more.
Love that.
That was deep, wasn't it?
That was deep. I'm having a moment here. But all right, question number 3. How can our listeners connect with you?
Oh, I jumped the gun with that one. So yeah, my website, GabrielleDolan.com. But like I said, if you go to the 7-day storytelling starter kit, that's the good place to go. There is actually, for your audience, I've got a couple of white papers, and one is around organizational change, and that might be really relevant. So just go to the resource section and you'll see the white papers. But it's I think it's called The Evolution of Organizational Change. I wrote it quite a few years ago, but I think it's still very, very valid, with a real focus on how do you do values rollout and organizational change better. Thank God we've moved on from giving everyone a coffee mug and a mouse pad with the values printed on them.
Oh, great. I got to scratch that off. I was just getting ready to order them. I could use all the help I can get on that. I don't know how many other HR people are like, yeah, we got to fix this. This is mission, vision, value stuff.
I've been guilty. Of that. Give everyone a Who Moved My Cheese book.
Hey, Yeah, sometimes you just throw stuff against the wall to see what sticks. But well, Gabrielle, it's been absolutely wonderful conversation. Some really powerful examples, and I think just a really fascinating insight into the power of stories and business, and how, especially in the context of being an HR practitioner, you do need to be able to influence, and in order to do that, you need to be able to tell some stories. So, and very clearly stated here. So, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to continuing to follow and learn from you.
Thanks, Kyle. Great to be part of it.
Thank you. Take care. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.